Welcome back to Sustainability's Leading Voices. Today I'm joined by Louisa, the co-founder and COO of Toast Ale, who are leading the way on tackling the global problem of food waste. Welcome, Louisa. Tell us about Toast Ale.
Toast Ale is a craft brewery. We use surplus bread from bakeries to brew our beer and then use all of our profits to support charities working to fix the food system.
So you mentioned fixing the food system. Why is food waste such a big environmental issue?
Well, the main problem is that our food production system is one of the biggest impacts that we have as humans on the planet. It's responsible for 80% of deforestation, about 70% of freshwater use, a third of greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, air pollution, etc., etc. We can go on, and yet we're wasting a third of all the food that we produce. And so it's that loss of all of the energy, the land, the water that's gone into producing our food in the first place that is really the big problem. At every touch point, for every meal you eat, somewhere in that supply chain there has been wastage. There's just a huge loss of everything that we've put into producing it and the environmental damage that we've caused along the way.
Can you expand on why food waste is happening at such a large scale?
Globally, we waste a third of all of the food that we produce. Similar statistics for the UK. At a farm level, it tends to be obviously crops, usually crops that are grown to forecasts that the farmers have from supermarkets. When they are planting those crops, they are never sure exactly what those final orders are going to be, or how productive the crop is going to be. Even it's very dependent on the weather, etc. Plus they have to meet cosmetic standards. At the retail side, then we have this expectation that our shelves are abundantly stocked, and supermarkets are trying to fulfill that with sourcing globally, and so there's inevitable overstocking there. And then at the consumer side, we are buying more food than we can consume and then not preserving that surplus food.
You talked there about how food waste is happening at a farm level, a supermarket level, and a home level. Obviously, Toast Ale really specialises in the supermarket area, working with surplus bread. What's been your experience of using different ingredients and working with different ingredients to overcome the waste and surplus problem?
It's actually harder to source ingredients that are surplus than it is to just buy a pre-packaged, ready-made ingredient. So not only are we're paying for the ingredient, we're having to create an entire business model that makes efficient use of that ingredient in the brewing process. So actually, yeah, it's more time consuming, and it has been more costly, and that is maybe not not understood, I guess, when people at a very high level just understand that it's made with a product that would have otherwise been wasted. I am careful not to say made with a waste product, because the product is not waste until it's wasted. That's why we use the word surplus. But yeah, that perception around excess, unwanted, it just it's very hard to communicate.
And in terms of communication, what has been your experience of bringing the food waste conversation to a mainstream audience? What challenges and misconceptions have you faced along the way?
We've gone from one challenge around communicating a new message to another around how to make sure that we can back up our messaging with the data and information that people need without also overwhelming them. It's less so now, but in the early days that we launched 7 years ago was how to tell the story of food surplus and the circular economy to people that were not used to hearing about it. Particularly within our category, that even conversations about sustainability were pretty rare in the public realm with like beer drinkers, and to start talking about using surplus was really challenging because some people had perceptions that the ingredients were inferior because they were surplus, that the ingredients were cheap because they were surplus, when, in fact, the bread that we're using, we're buying it, it's as fresh as the bread that you're buying from the shelves in the supermarket. But it's just we're preventing it going from waste. So that, I guess, it was a like communications challenge for us in the early days. Particular, it's become less so as people have become much more used to hearing brands talk about um, sustainability in particular. But I think now we're getting into this territory of consumers being wary of greenwashing and doubtful of claims that are being made, because there are a lot of brands that are making claims without the integrity behind those claims, without the transparency around what they're truly doing. There's a risk that negatively impacts on authentic brands like Toast and others who've been doing it for a very long time.
Toast Ale is a prime example of one of those authentic brands that has been around for a long time. What inspired you to start the business?
I wanted to have a direct impact myself. I wanted to be able to control the actions that I was taking and see the direct impact of that. My co-founder Tristram had met a brewer in Brussels that had used bread from their local bakery to produce a beer, and he was inspired to create a beer that could tackle some of that huge mountain of bread surplus that's produced by bakeries and then sits with often some of the bigger retailers, to create a product that directly solved that waste problem, but also through its sales could generate funds for charities. And I'm particularly excited about the platform it gives us to have a conversation with people about food, our food system, our entire food system, but also the really simple, equitable, cost-effective way of tackling some of those big environmental problems simply by not wasting it.
It's great to hear how you started Toast out of a desire to really create change. What level of impact is Toast Ale having?
We know that there are 280,000 tons of bread being wasted every single day, and Toast has had an impact. We have upcycled over 3 million slices of bread, which, if stacked up, would be about 4.5 times the height of Everest. But we recognise that we need everyone to be part of action to reduce that surplus bread. We've collaborated with over 100 breweries, but now looking at actually how we can help them to overcome some of the barriers.
As you said, collaboration is going to be key to solving the food waste problem. Toast Ale has a long-standing relationship with the co-op. Tell us more about that.
Co-op wanted to look at their own supply chain and look at how they can be part of the solution, helping to avoid waste in their own supply chain. So we have, I guess it's a three-way collaboration, working with their supplier to take their surplus, use it in our brewing to create a very special edition beer for Co-op, package that up, and then have that in stores.
Getting into supermarkets is a great way of reaching mainstream audiences. And we talked earlier about some of the challenges of engaging those audiences on sustainability and issues like food waste. How have partnerships like the one with the Co-op helped you engage those audiences?
Well, we've worked with Co-op for many years. They're a supporter of Social Enterprise, and we're a member of Social Enterprise UK. In fact, we did a project with them a few years back where we had a QR code on the can that you could scan and see Michael Sheen appear in augmented reality, telling the story of social enterprise and how business can be part of the solution for the climate and ecological crisis that we face.
Toast Ale has proven that interventions within supply chains can provide practical solutions to food waste. How do we make that happen at scale?
I'm seeing change now within the supply chain of companies, but beyond even our own supply chain. How do we get that sophisticated collaboration and overcome any concerns around commercial sensitivities of data, for example, and competitiveness. Those are the things that tend to come up quite a lot. And similarly, you need to have bigger companies working with smaller companies who operate very differently. Bigger companies, it takes longer to go through the processes of looking at the supply chain, for example, and implementing ideas. And it can be quite frustrating as a small business that can move quite agilely. And yet the big companies, they have a lot of such valuable resources and expertise that can support smaller businesses. So it's how do we move at the pace that we absolutely have to move at now, given where we are with the climate and nature crisis, but make sure it's done properly.
You talk about doing it properly. Some of the solutions to really achieve scalability are going to require big changes to how large companies operate, and that will come at cost and risk. What shifts do we need to see?
Sometimes it's very easy to deal with waste if you just look at it at that stage in the life cycle. If it's the waste, how do we treat waste? How do we prevent it going from landfill, but by finding alternative uses for it, might direct us towards energy for waste or anaerobic digestion, because it's a waste treatment. What we're not doing is looking at the whole life cycle. And so, we can find that actually it's cheaper or easier for a company to just have a waste management company that deals with it than it is to look and redesign the whole food value chain for them. And so I think there's a need to look at actually how we change the incentives and kind of encourage that conversation that is about the circular economy and not just waste management.
You've just talked there about the challenges in changing the system as a whole. As a mission-focused SME, what challenges are you facing right now?
Particularly acute at the moment is how we compete on price in particular. We're wanting to create a solution that everybody can engage with. And so we want to ensure that the product is affordable to everybody. The challenge with that as a small business is achieving either economies of scale or looking at price and having a higher price point so that we can cover the costs. The latter we don't really want to do because, as I say, we don't want to price people out. But we saw a huge increase in the cost of barley as a result of the Russian war. We've had energy costs that have increased significantly over the past year, and all of these cause the product to be much more expensive for us to produce. So it's like, how do we get that balance right so that we can compete in a very crowded market? It's a very competitive environment, particularly for purpose-led businesses who are not prepared to make any concessions on the principles of the way that the ingredients are sourced, the way the product is produced, and the messaging and storytelling that we tell around those products. It creates much more pressure for us as a business.
We've talked a lot about challenges and how collaboration can help overcome some of those. What are some of the benefits that you've found from collaborating in the food waste space?
Oh, loads. It's from a personal perspective, it is really rewarding to be able to work, with big established companies that are able to gain media traction very quickly. They're able to get the ear of policymakers much easier than we might be able to as a small company. And so in terms of us achieving some of our purpose targets, which involve system change that requires industry and government to be involved in that. It can be much easier to do that with a bigger company in collaboration with them. So I think for Toast as an SME, we have been able to have a much bigger impact and reach, the audiences of those that we've collaborated with as well, to take that conversation way beyond our immediate sphere of influence.
What are the next steps for dealing with food waste in the UK?
Ideally, we have full transparency of where waste is occurring in the system so that we can direct resources appropriately to solve that problem. And then food waste obviously sits within the food system and the broader problems that we have with our food system. We had Henry Dimbleby's paper that made pretty clear recommendations to the government, most of which have not been actioned. And there is frustration from pretty much everybody within the food system. In fact, Feedback, the charity that we support, won a court action so that there'll be a judicial review on the legality of the government's food strategy that at the moment is not aligned with the net zero targets, particularly around how we need to address the consumption of meat and dairy. So lots of issues within the broader food system that need attention, but we need real government commitment to take action.
Thank you, Louisa, for joining us and sharing all of your insights. If you're watching this live, come over to Twitter or Threads and share your thoughts, and join us next week for another episode of Sustainability's Leading Voices.